And so I thought this was nice to like put in here, but the motives of the people behind this study. Well, for one thing, this TPS survey, and they also go on to do, like, I think the first introductory page, they mentioned a series of different surveys. TPS isn't the only one, right? There's a bunch of other evaluations for patients to explain their trust in their physicians, but TPS was the one that they focused on. But out of all of these different methods, out of all of these measurements of their trust, they've done it many times. This isn't unknown, but they did realize that this is severely understudied when it comes down to psychiatric patients, meaning that there's been plenty of patients that gave the survey for their physicians for their like actual physical disabilities and illnesses and such, but patients who are in the psychiatric area, it's not as studied. So that was their motive for this. And for this part, they emphasized a couple times that when they made this study, that nothing is known about the relationship between trust in the healthcare provider and satisfaction for Nigerian psychiatric patients. Well, at the time that this was made. So that was also their motive. That means that this study was the first of its kind. So I think it might be subjected to many like criticisms because it's kind of like the first one. And so for this study, they did use TPS. But however, they did like show that it may not be perfect for like a psychiatric patient or outpatients because again, it is mostly used with patients with their physicians. And their second objective was to try to find, maybe by doing this survey, they could find the main factors associated with trust between the patient and their doctor, and maybe they can use this to help improve the quality of care between psychiatric patients and their doctors in Nigeria. So I thought that was just nice to add in. So for the patients, they chose a pretty, let me fix this over here. So they chose a pretty like large sample of patients. They specifically chose patients that were either in like remission of their psychiatric disorders or weren't like going through a really bad episode at the time. They made sure that they were kind of like patients that were able to go out, which is why they're outpatients. You know, they can be out, they can live like a normal life, and they specifically had it this way. And I believe the reason why they specifically chose this kind of demographic was because typically, if you are going through a pretty bad episode, you're more likely to just be irrationally like untrustworthy of anybody, just people in general. This is just kind of what I thought, because like this is my personal opinion. Others might think differently, but I think it's seems fair if they chose certain people that are specifically in remission, because I think if you're going to choose patients, if you're going to measure a patient's level of trust, if they are in a psychotic episode or going through some kind of mania, I think that needs to be a separate study, not to be mixed with ones that are in remission. So I think that this was probably a good highlight of it. And down here, I just, in this last paragraph, I just put in what they said they had to be kind of eligible, which is kind of like the requirements to make sure that patients, these outpatients, were like okay enough to be for the study, to kind of like make a line. So, in this part, from what I've been reading from this, they showed, or they saw in the results of the survey, that more factors go into the trustworthiness questions. So in the survey, they had some questions that were asking about trust, like do you trust them, or like questions in that ball area, like do you trust that they keep your info confidential? Do you trust that they have your best interest at heart? They had questions like that. Then they had other questions, I think they called them like reversed questions, something like that, which means that like they mainly focused on, do you have doubt that they have your best interest at heart? Are you more uncertain? So they had questions that questioned, do you like them? Do you trust them? And then they had questions like, do you doubt them? Are you uncertain of this? And so with these two different types of questions, they saw that the ones with the trustworthiness that asked about do you trust them had more various, was more various in the results. But the ones that had doubtful, that the questions that asked do you doubt them, was more consistent with the answers. And I'm honestly not surprised, because I feel like this goes into the fact that it's way hard. It's easier to be pessimistic than optimistic. It's easier to find a reason to not trust someone than to build up that trust over time. So I think it makes sense that to say I trust this person is more fluctuating answers in that than to say I doubt this person, because it's easier to doubt someone in general, especially if you're like kind of at their mercy in terms of you being in their care. So I can see why it was more consistent answers with the doubtful questions, or the questions that were more doubt oriented. And what surprised me was that in this case, there wasn't much of a difference based on the sex, marital status, and the diagnostic groups. I thought it would definitely affect it, especially honestly, especially like the gender, in my opinion. I feel like sometimes if like who you're paired with kind of like affects if you feel like they understand you. So like a woman with a woman doctor or a man with a man doctor, I always felt like that was very important, or that was like vital in my opinion. But in this one, there wasn't really much of a correlation. And same thing with your status or your marital status, and even the diagnostic groups. So probably if you had like schizophrenia, borderline disorder, or others. And they emphasized a lot that there was a very positive correlation between trust and number of admissions. So apparently, if you were admitted multiple times, you had a higher trust, which shocked me, because I always thought if you had to be admitted a lot of times, I thought that maybe like you would grow to trust them less. Because if I were a person who had to be admitted so many times, I would think, oh, it's not working because I have to keep coming back. But that's not the case here. So this surprised me that those who got admitted a lot had more trust, and they mentioned this quite a few times throughout their results, that this was a very big correlation. And this is kind of lengthy, but I just put this in here because I still think it's pretty important. So what is over here is the comparison between what they introduced in the intro. So in the intro, they explained that lots of surveys between trusted patients and their doctors is mainly between those who have physical illnesses, not really psychiatric. So when after the results, they decided to compare this trust with patients that did have trust with doctors for physical purposes. And they saw that in this Nigerian case, it wasn't too far off. So this one was for the psychiatric evaluation of trust, 75.74. But I'm trying to get rid of this. This number isn't too far off from what they had for the other scores. For example, with the cardiologists, they had also in the 70s. Same thing with the diabetic patients. So for this Nigerian case, the physical evaluations of trust wasn't too much from the psychiatric, although it is less. The psychiatric is less. And for this part, this is what they added in to kind of make up for like the skepticism that might be behind this study. So why they have this high score, right? They did have a pretty high score for trust with psychiatric patients, and they're saying this could be due to the fact that those who seek out this medical care, these patients, these outpatients who are currently in the medical, like getting treatment. They are regularly getting evaluated. So obviously, you would assume that they have trust. So, but I think that like if they were to include people who aren't currently seeking medication, who aren't seeking out doctors, I still think it's probably best that they didn't include that in the study because again, like I mentioned before, I feel like this is where it needs to be a separate study. Whereas a separate study if they're currently in a mania episode or a separate study if they aren't even getting treatment at all. Then mixing it in with those who are getting treatment and their trust. So I don't think that it's like too big of a deal, but it is important to mention that those who are getting help are obviously going to have more trust. And for this part, they mentioned that this survey, when they didn't just hand them the survey and that was it. They made sure that the outpatients understood the questions that that they like because sometimes when you're given a survey you can interpret what the question means differently compared to another person and that can affect how you answer it. So for this one they were just saying oh like we made sure that the patients had an understanding of what the question was asking, what the question was looking for, and that's just what they added in. So for here, this was just some questions I had in. For one thing, why did they choose outpatients? So why I put this question in is that it is important that they evaluate outpatients, people who are no longer who are no longer have to be constantly supervised, who are okay to go outside. But if you ask me, I feel like a study like this, especially because it's one of the first, I felt like it would be really important if it was those who had to frequently be admitted in because I feel like their opinion on trust might be a bit more easier to see because they have to interact or be in the hospital more. An outpatient can be outside. You know, patients who have to be in all the time, I think their opinion on what's going on in there might be more accurate, might be more, maybe a little more credible because they're in the hospital more, they are with the staff more. So I feel that's just kind of what was going through my head when I saw, oh, they chose outpatients instead of ones who are in the hospital. Another question, this kind of let me down when I saw this, but they had the questions in English. I was thinking, why not have it in the native language of the country? Why did they do it in English? And I know that in the previous slide, I said that they made sure that they hadn't understood, the patients understood the questions, not that, oh, here's it in English, which isn't the primary language of our country, but here's it in English. Try to understand it. No, they made sure that they understood it. But even then, I still feel like, would it really have been that hard to make it in the primary language of the country? That's kind of what was in my head. I was like, why did it have to be in English? That's kind of what I was very skeptical about when I read this. And another thing that made me skeptical about this study was that they chose patients who already knew their physicians for several years. This one also made me kind of like, why did it have to be like people who knew them for several years? Again, maybe they did patients who knew their physicians for several years because they felt maybe if they had a low trust, then that really shows how developed this department is. If you've been out of the hospital and you're okay with going outside and you've known your physician for so many years, you're bound to have a lot of trust. So maybe if this survey didn't turn out well, if it turned out badly, then that is really telling of how this system is. But that wasn't the case. You had a high trust, and which is good, but again, knew them for several years, and they were outpatients. So that's what was going through my head as I was doing the pros and cons of this study. And again, I'm mentioning this again, this was like a first to explore the concept of trust amongst Nigerian psychiatric outpatients. It's the first study of its kind, so I'm assuming very new, so I'm probably not going to expect it to get into every detail of this kind of question, of this evaluation of this area. And then lastly, I just included this part because I actually have a story I want to mention as we kind of go to the end of this. It was a story that I really appreciated to hear about, Western biological views versus African spiritual views in terms of mental health. It was a story I heard 2 semesters ago in a class, and I really appreciated it because it helped me open my eyes a little bit more. I'll probably tell it at the end if we have some more time. But yeah, this is my presentation.
So when it gave that mean score, was that the amount of people who like didn't trust their doctors or did trust their doctors? Who did? And
yeah.
That was like the mean score of like the amount of patients that trusted their doctor?
Yeah, so they compared that score with the others that showed like patients who had trust with their cardiologists, and which was in the high 70s, and they were saying, well, this was like 75 for patients who trust their psychiatric doctors, and they compared it to like the 78 that compare their cardiologist, and then they had a list of other physicians and their doctors, and they're saying, oh, like it isn't too far off. But like as I mentioned before, my other like skepticism of it.
And what is it out of?
What is it out of? I believe this part, let's see.
It says in the paper under TPS scale, it's a 0 to 100 scale. So 100 would be the highest.
Oh, okay. All right.
Oh, is that what you were asking me? Sorry, I thought you meant.
Yeah.
I thought you wanted me to say the population of the survey. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was thinking the mean score was like, I was thinking it was something else because you were saying it was like 78, but I was like, oh, but if that's 78 out of like the amount of patients, I was like, that's kind of low. But that makes sense how it's a, to 100 scale.
Yeah, so there were 223 patients. That's what I read on the PDF now. 223 patients, but they did do it on a scale from 2 to 100.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah, could you put the questions in the chat?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I had some initial thoughts on your skepticism on the questionnaires being presented in English. Initially, my first idea on why they might have done that is maybe when they wrote the items on the questionnaires, then it being in English meant that like the researchers knew exactly what was being asked and nothing got lost in translation. That was my first initial idea. But then again, I know these types of tests can be translated into other languages successfully. So there is that as well. But I know one thing that I do know is that when translated from English to another language, there are some untranslatable concepts. And like also vice versa as well. So maybe keeping it in English, the researchers knew exactly what they were asking to keep everything consistent. That was just one idea I wanted to throw out.
Where did it say that the questions were in English? Because I guess I made the assumption that they had translated it, but.
So I will try to find it. Because these were parts that I copied and pasted from like a few days ago, so I had to kind of find it in the PDF.
No worries, it could be something I missed. I just, it's interesting, like, when we read papers, we kind of sometimes make assumptions about certain things. So I just assumed, oh, okay, they had translated into.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
That's what I thought at first. I was like, oh, it'll probably be in their language, right? But no. I was like, what? Like you should have seen my face when I read that. I was like, but what if like they didn't maybe they didn't get certain like phrases or something like that? But then like I still like read, the pros and cons kind of again. They made sure that the patients demonstrated an understanding of what these questions were asking. So they're probably fluent in English, but I was still kind of like, they should have just made it the native language of the country. It was just my opinion.
I did type it in because I was like, well, how common is English in Nigeria? It does say English is the official language of Nigeria, but it's not the most widely spoken language in Nigeria. But it is technically the official language.
It's
And
official? Oh, Creole's also a language there? That's cool.
another thing I noticed, it's a small detail, but I think it could be relevant. In table one, when they present the number of or years of education of outpatients, the range for it is 5 to 24. So if I'm interpreting that right, that means all of them had at least 5 years of education. So maybe I don't know if it's like higher education or just education in general. But could have picked up English in that time, hopefully.
Or their results might be biased towards certain socioeconomic groups that would be more prone to speaking English. That'd be interesting to see, like,
Yeah.
if they could put it in a different language spoken in like Nigeria, which has like hundreds of languages, if there'd be a difference between different groups.
That makes me wonder. So if it was done in English, then I kind of like wonder for those who, because there are multiple languages. So it makes me really wonder if they in the future would have done like the survey pertaining to people who know one of those bunches of language. Like they kind of group them by which language they know. That's just what I thought of right now as you're mentioning it.
I know you mentioned that gender didn't really affect the level of trust some of the patients felt. So I'm curious to know if maybe some of the doctors if the doctors and the patients had were like the same sex or if they differed from individuals, because like I know for me, like I have a female physician and I feel like I can trust her. So I'm just curious if that differed for them and how that would maybe affect their level of trust.
So I'm glad you mentioned that because I always choose a female doctor in terms of anything physician related. Um, so when I was reading this, right, and they said the gender or sex didn't really affect it, I thought maybe it's because they already had like doctors that were the same as them. So that's why there was no like, because like if all the women have a woman doctor and all the men have the men doctor, then whatever trust they have based on the gender difference is obviously not going to really be there. But I did read in the beginning there is a severe like lack of women doctors in Nigeria. So now I'm thinking if women only had women doctors or mainly had women doctors, does that really happen there? Because if there is a real lack of women doctors, I would assume that means that maybe most women patients have a man doctor because of just the lack of that. I don't know if that's the case because it doesn't mention it. If women had women doctors mainly, but it did mention that there's way less women doctors than men doctors, which also does surprise me that there was still, despite that, still not much of a difference based on their sex and their doctor's trust. I guess it's maybe just it's different. I guess people just have the view that they're your doctor, doesn't matter man or woman, they're your doctor and they're going to take care of you. Maybe that's how it is.
I mean, I don't think there's a difference in, how a doctor is if they're, their ability to, be deliver proper news and whatnot. I don't think there should be much of a difference in terms of that, but
if they've got the qualifications.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting because I know they mentioned somewhere like for one particular study that one particular subset that the men were a little bit more trustworthy, but it was very slight. But that might be in response to what you just said, that there are not many there are more male physicians than female physicians, which may have contributed to the men feeling more trust for that particular one small case.
Yeah. So I know that like some people or like a lot of different places, it doesn't matter what gender your doctor is. If they have the qualifications, then you can trust them. I'm more skeptical. That's just kind of how I am. I don't think I'd ever want like a guy doctor, like unless it's like if I have a cold or a fever, fine. But for other reasons, not really. But like again, I guess that's just kind of a difference in opinion. Let's see here.
Can I ask you guys a question? I mean, it's somewhat, it's a similar line of question. Because they gave the patients this survey, or this, this survey to complete while they were at the doctor's office. And I'm just kind of, in my mind, I'm wondering, would they have received different results had this been a survey that was mailed home or was in a different setting than, hey, my doctor's right here. And I mean, they, I'm sure they explained your doctor is not going to see these results, but I do wonder if that maybe influences how the patients may have responded.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point.
It's like those end of semester surveys that all your instructors have you fill out. Like if we have you fill them out in class, you probably fill them out one way, but if you're filling them out at home, like on your own time, you probably fill them out a different way. So question with survey design, right? Like what's the best environment for a survey?
Yeah, maybe if they were at home, they would have been more bold with their answers, or like just more honest, or maybe took more time reading it. Because like when you're at the doctor's office, it's not like it's someplace you want to be for a while, so maybe they were just, who knows if they were rushing through it or just like skimming it and kind of just like went into it superficially. But yeah, who knows? But I do want to add though how I know for like certain specialties, I would rather have maybe like a woman doctor. Like if I was gonna go to, like the gynecologist or the obstetrician, like I would prefer a female. And but I think also with the doctors that I had growing up, like my parents always like, I mean, they would always prefer for me to have a woman doctor, but I would occasionally get a male one. And I guess I didn't for the most part feel like any discomfort with it. So I think that is what has made me more like open to like, different genders of doctors. Like I also think that despite your gender, you got to have the qualities. Because if you're like, because you can be like a woman doctor and be like a total B person, like you don't want them. So I also wonder, yeah, if probably because there was more male doctors, I wonder if maybe we females were kind of just like, okay, like this is
it.
this is it. So I gotta like trust them one way or another, or I don't know.
Yeah.
But
I think I did not see this word for word, but I think in one of the intro of this PDF, it did mention that the scale of women to men was like 1 to 7. 1 to 7 of doctors. So I think if it, and I don't think that many people would be surprised of that if 1 to 7 of women to men. So I think you make a really good point with that. Like if it's kind of like, well, there's barely any women compared to men, so just kind of go along with it. You just gotta trust it. If this is the situation you have, and this is just the kind of norm here. We have way more male doctors, so you're just gonna have to trust them either way. So I think that's actually a really good point too. If like you're a person who prefers the doctor who has the same gender as you, and yet you really don't have that access, then you just got to go with it, and maybe you'll realize, oh, there's no worry at all.
Yeah, maybe that's why there wasn't that much of a big difference with like the sex, because like, um, you know, it's not like they had the option, so they were like, you know, whatever.
Yeah. And maybe that's also why with like marital status and even the diagnostic groups, why there wasn't much of a difference. I think overall, there's like the common knowledge that they're your doctor, they have the qualifications, you kind of just have to trust them, like put your faith or take a leap of faith in them because they are the doctor. So maybe that's why there were a few groups that just did not have any difference with it.
I think this ties back into your question about like these outpatients knowing their physicians for several years. I think because they've known them for a while, that trust inherently develops more. So like the one you're talking about with, you know, just going along with it if it is a male doctor. Um, and I think one thing that could be done, or another study that could be conducted, maybe is on those who had their doctors for maybe a shorter term. I think those results might also be interesting, though they might vary a lot more. They might fluctuate a lot more than these outpatients who have known their physicians for several years. I think it could still be interesting to see, you know, the results of that study if it is performed on a
Yeah.
more short-term scale.
I
with
think
these
because
tests.
this was like a first study in for Nigeria for like trust with psychiatric patients, I think they had a lot that they had to kind of cut off, like of variables they had to cut off. Like how long did they know them shortly? Uh, are they outpatients or inpatients? I think they had to like really narrow it down because it's a first of its kind, like a first of its kind. So there's just so much to do, so much to work on, and they really had to shave off a lot of things. So that's why I'm kind of like, okay, it is like not, it's definitely not explored enough. So I'm gonna kind of give it the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more. When I was reading as well, I definitely came up with more questions than answers, you know, while just reading.
I was like, I'm skeptic. like
Yeah.
yeah. So
Also,
what was that?
oh, I was just gonna, I don't know, I have like a psychiatrist, and so I just wonder, um, how maybe their role is like different there. Like I don't know. Like, because I know there's different psychiatrists who like approach their patients differently. And also just like knowing my friends and their doctors that they had, like I just wonder also, I don't know. Because each like psychiatrist is kind of different with how like they kind of understand like their patients like background and behavior and how they get to it and then how they treat it. So I just like
Yeah.
I wonder if that's also
There
a
is like
factor.
the story I wanted to tell. So because we're like 10 minutes in or 10 minutes away, I'm gonna try to like shorten the story as much as I can. So story is this man is saying, he goes with his friends to a city in Africa or a city in a country in Africa. And there's a woman he meets there. She does spiritual healing for those who have mental issues or mental illness, diseases, who have depression, especially. They help them spiritually or through spiritual methods, not medicine, really, or the medicine we would know in a hospital here. So he has never, him being from America, has never experienced any kind of spiritual ritual to help with mental illness. So when she offers him, like, and he once had depression, by the way, he mentions he used to have depression. He's on medication or he's like getting better from it, but he did once have it. And well, he still has it. It doesn't go away. Sorry. Or it didn't go away, but he's better. And so when the woman questioned him about it, she offered, maybe I could give you one of my sessions and maybe would you like to give it a try? He said, yeah. This session to help someone with their depression is very, 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 very different. His story of this session was weird, but fascinating. Basically, it's a small village, by the way, this one he visited. This woman is very well known for her healing of people of their depression. So the whole community knows her. So when she does a session and she needs help, all the community goes into help, which is really sweet. And it's a very long, lengthy one, so I'm not going to get too much into it, but it involves the slaying of a lamb, and then you pour the blood on you, and then the people will dance around you. You wrap its intestines around your neck. You wrap its like bodily organs around other parts of your body. And as you are wrapped in the blood and the organs and the intestines, everyone is dancing around you, shouting around you. And by the way, you're completely naked when this is happening. So yeah, completely naked, drenched in blood, all of this of the poor lamb. Everyone's dancing. You've got music. You've got banging drums. The whole community is doing this, by the way, because that's the ritual. The community comes together and does this with you, and you are in the center as everyone is dancing around you. Then after that, you eat from the lamb. They even gave him a bottle of Coke, like of Coca-Cola, just to make him feel more a little bit like, oh, here's just a Coca-Cola. And then after that, they say take like an 8-hour nap, take this like grain, give it to a blind man in the morning when you wake up, and then you will be cured of your depression. So that is me shortening this story very much. There are so many more details I had to leave out, but that's the main parts of the ritual. And this man who just went through that whole experience, and he has to tell, like, how was it? Did it work? What he said was he had never felt so, like, up in his life. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily, like, happy, like, but he's like, I felt really, like, up in the whole climax of this. People, the whole community dancing around him, he's in the center, he's in, like, all these, like, body parts of a lamb, and he's like, it really kind of lifts you up in that moment. And he was explaining why all of this, though. So he did make a really good point. Why did he feel so up? It's the fact that he's in the daylight, he's outside, he's in the sun, and all these people who don't even know him are all contributing to make him feel better. This ritual is supposed to cure a person of their depression. It's supposed to make them feel happy again. Everybody partakes in this. All the community will take hours off their day, maybe take the whole day off, just to go to the circle, dance around to make you feel happy, or to just, help you in any way. So the fact that all these strangers did this, and they slaughtered one of their own lambs, they put in all this effort, and it's not easy to do all this just for him, this stranger, who's also foreign, by the way, a foreign stranger who they don't know, who they'll probably never see again. And that's what made him so happier. Like, that's just what made him a lot happier. And he was saying, he asked some of the other, spiritual doctors there, he's like, have you ever met anyone from the Western side that what their techniques were for for trying to cure mental illness? And they said, this was funny. They said they were weirdos. Like the doctors in the place, they're like, these people from like the Europe, their way of like helping people of their mental illness was by keeping them in rooms by themselves and forcing them to talk about depressing issues all day, every day, keeping them closed in rooms, all this. And they're like, it was weird. We had to kick them out. It was too weird. And the fact that they saw the Western way as so weird, that being in a hospital, being in a room, having to talk with someone about what's making you so upset constantly for hours. And they're like, that's just so weird. Wouldn't you rather be in the sun with everyone with you, with everyone coming together, we're all like dancing, we're all in the sun, we're all interacting. Isn't that what's it all about? So that's why they're like, this is so weird with the Western way. And then they're like, we just couldn't what is it? Collaborate with them. We like, yeah, they couldn't really collaborate with them because it was just so different and how they viewed it, how it was going to help. So that's my brief description of the story. I loved it a lot, and I feel like it's a really good insight.
Where did you hear this story?
Um, a few semesters ago, I took a speech class, and we had to
Okay.
listen to speeches
Oh.
and story times, and that's where I heard it.
Was this from like a fellow classmate or like?
Oh, it was, sorry, I should have
Fine.
specified. It was from, we had to, the teacher would provide us with story times of people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the teacher was like, here's a story time of this person and their speech or their speech and their story.
I think it's a very interesting story because I feel like obviously for many reasons, but one thing that I kind of took away from that is I feel like in both cases, whether like the person went down the more spiritual route or whether they went down the I guess the medical route or like the more Western medicine route, I feel like in both cases there was some sort of like, because we, upon my first initial reaction hearing that story, I was like, oh, that's a little odd. But then when you said that, that they thought we were weird or like our type of way of medicine is weird, I'm like, okay, maybe it's just like a way of feeling better. Is this like maybe a strong belief in your organ, like I think it's called like the organizing framework of how you like view getting yourself better. Because I feel like they had like such a strong belief in like this is how um
Yeah.
how to treat like sadness. Whereas in Western medicine, we go full analysis into exact like biological ways that we can treat sadness or like depression, right? I just feel like it's not in the end. Whichever one you have like the most confidence in, I feel like you're gonna end up
Yeah.
being, I guess, more cured by that one. I don't know.
You do
It's
make a
kind of
good
one thing I
point
took
with
away
that.
from it.
Yeah, it is a good point. And for this man, the who told his story, he dealt with his depression with obviously the Western way, the medical route, the going to the hospital route, all and such. So giving this completely different situation a try was definitely completely new to him. But like I loved his intake, right? And it wasn't like a bashing of one side or the other. Like it wasn't me like the end he was kind of like just it was more of a joking, right? Like of how weird like his end speech or little paragraph at the end was more like how weird the Western way was to this tribe. And which is I think is still important for him to add because it's a really good in perspective if you ask me. The way he described how weird the Western way was to the tribe's perspective made me like think, okay, yeah, that's weird. Um, and so that's why I appreciated it a lot. But it's still like overall, his whole speech was pretty neutral. Wasn't really saying, "Oh my gosh, this ritual was so weird. It was the weirdest thing in the world." No, he kind of just explained it, what happened, the steps, how it was, and then you can decide for the rest. But I do like how I do agree where if this is where you grew up with and this is the norm or this is how you do it, obviously you're gonna believe it more. So I think it's impactful that when I heard this story, when I listened to this story, and even I was kind of like, I can see how this could work. I mean, I still think it's kind of weird, but I can see how it can work. So I just thought it's nice. I just wanted to add that in the terms of like the spiritual way in this African tribe compared to the Western way. So I hope you liked the story. It was very rushed, but I hope you liked it.
Yeah, did you like from hearing that story, did you kind of like look for something for an article that like related to like psychiatric care or
This article, I won't say like I looked for this article because of that story, but when I was looking through some of the articles in the database, I came across this one And I remembered that impactful story I heard of over a year ago. And I was remembering this story and I was like, oh, like, so I clicked on this and then I read through it and then I made my PowerPoint and the such. So, not really, I was looking for it because of the story, but I saw the title, got reminded of the story, and looked for it.
Yeah, because I remember from like from our last meeting how sometimes you like cherry pick for like stuff that kind of like relate to what you believe in, and not like you were exactly doing that, but like, you know, there's definitely people who like look for an article that matches like an initial thought or fact that they thought they had, that like, oh yeah, increased COVID vaccinations, like, you know, whatever, it has some impact. So you look for something like that. But obviously, like for you, it wasn't that thing. But
Yeah,
I don't know.
I saw the title and I was like, this reminds me of that cool story. I wonder if it's similar. I mean, this study wasn't similar to what the story I thought of, but it did like kind of encourage me to click on the link and read it.
Well, thank you so much. It's 5:03 now, so I really appreciated that one. That was really good. I guess that's it for today's meeting. I guess people have to go, so we'll see each other next week.
Next week, right? Anant is presenting next week, right? Okay.
Wonderful.
Okay, I'll post it on the Blackboard site. I need to go back. Okay.
And
Yeah, I
is
don't think I saw it, but
is a week after me, right? Is that what you
The
said?
week after is you, and that will be in person. So Panchu in person on March 7th. And then March 14th, Allison, and then we've got spring break, and then Miriam question mark for the 28th.
yeah, I want to try and still find someone like a guest person. So maybe around then, I'll ask my professor to see if he knows anyone too.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye. Yeah, see you guys next week. All right, Joseph, come on in.
An example of Sternberg's empty love from the Big Bang Theory. Sternberg has 7 types of love that he describes. Sternberg uses intimacy, passion, and commitment as According to the Human Sexuality textbook, normal sexual behavior is highly subjective to each individual's and sexual partner's preferences and beliefs, Yarber and Sayad, 2019. However, society has constructed a set of moral beliefs that surround ideas